As a broker, I'm often asked this one question. How do you recognize a good deal in real estate? How do you know if this is the right property to buy? Well, it's simple. We look for 3 points: equity, cash flow, and sellability. If it has all 3 of these points, it's a good deal. It's just whether or not I'm in a financial position to take advantage of it. You want to know more? All right, well, perfect. Let's get to it. 3 points of a deal. Welcome to New Harlem Realty, where we're here to talk about all things that deal with real estate, whether it's purchasing, whether it's selling, whether it's investing, whether it's being a landlord, whatever it may be. We're here to talk about all things dealing with real estate. So that way you can make a more informative decision when you're doing those things, because who wants to make those type of decisions and not know? And today we're going to talk about something so important. How do I recognize a good real estate deal? Is there any simplified way in being able to recognize it? Typically, when I was asked this question, I used to give a very overcomplex answer. And matter of fact, when I asked my mentors and other investors that I know, they would give me a very overly complex answer. And so I began to think to myself, is there a simplified way of being able to do it? And after a while, me taking in consideration how I looked at properties, and then also my clients, a lot of investor clients I have, how they looked at properties, and my mentors, I began to put it all together and say, you know what? Hey, I noticed the same exact pattern a lot of the times with these individuals, including myself. And so I developed a system to be able to recognize a deal that I now share with my clients. I now share with friends or even family, and it has served everyone well, not just in the states of Louisiana and Texas where I do real estate, but also in different places like Florida, Pennsylvania, and other various places. So here it is, 3 points of a deal. So what are they? Well, let's start off with the first one, equity. Equity is how much the property has financed for versus how much it appraises for. Matter of fact, I said it backwards because you get a negative number that way. Let's do it properly. How much the property appraises for minus how much I owe or how much I finance. The remainder of that gives me equity. So let's use some real numbers. Let's just say that I have a property that it appraises for $300,000. I bought this property and financed it for $200,000. $200,000 is how much I owe, how much I financed it for with the bank. And so now when we look at it and we're trying to figure out how much equity I have in the property, we're going to say $300,000, which is how much the property appraised for, minus $200,000, how much I financed it for, equals $100,000 in equity, positively. And so here it is. That's the equity that I have in the property. Or another way we can say it is how much net I have in the property. And that's, again, how much the property appraises for minus how much I owe or finance. And from there, well, what we're going to do with the equity? Well, before we get there, we'll talk about that later, about using the equity for collateral loans or using it for HELOCs and things of that nature. But let's talk about how we can use it to recognize a deal in regards of how it's manifested. So in this case, how do we look for it? Well, we look for potential equity growth. That's one. The second one being existing equity. The third one is creating equity. So let's deal with potential equity growth. Now, how do we recognize potential equity growth? This is when we look at the trends. For all my stock traders and investors, you all, love trends. So this is something that you all would love. But this here is typically used for newer homes. Homes that are being built. So let's just say that we went into a community, right? In this community, they had 3 phases being built. We'll just use this right now. And so phase 1 started off around the 330,000 and it's almost finished. And the next phase starts off at 360 and they're getting ready to go forth. And then the last phase 3, is starting off at 390s. Well, whenever they fully finish phase 1 and then they start getting to phase 2 and get midway through, typically prices begin to rise, especially by the end of phase 2. My property may not be 360 or 370, but it might get up to about 345, 350. And by the time they end with phase 3 or get midway through phase 3, by the time they get there, now my property that was once I purchased for 330. That might have rose up to about 340, 350, or whatever the case may be. Now maybe in the 360s and 370s. So you can see the potential equity growth as the neighborhood grows and it gets built. There's potential equity growth there. So as long as I get in there early enough, or if I'm in an area where it's super, super hot, like super areas like Austin, San Marcos, Kyle, Buda, places that I'm locally around, or even in the DFW area up north, you can really take advantage of potential equity growth. The next one, existing equity. This is the famous one. This is one that we all know because a lot of times we're looking for these, whether it's we've heard about it through internet or different talk shows. When you talk about existing equity, you're talking about properties that are distressed. And what does it mean by distress? Foreclosures. Unfortunately, when it comes from a divorce type situation, succession through some family member dying, and typically the inheritors want to just get rid of it. Maybe they don't want it ties for sentimental value or whatever the case may be. These are typically distressed properties. And another one is assignment properties, properties that's just, it's not even foreclosed. They just didn't take care of the property. And a lot of times you get somebody who does assignments, or somebody who's just trying to get rid of the property. Whatever the case may be, the property is in a condition that discounts its value. And so here we are. Let's just say, what do you mean by discount? If we're in an area, let's just say that these properties again are selling for $300,000, and we find this property in this neighborhood that sells for $300,000. We find a property that's selling for $100,000. Now it will require again that we have to invest $100,000 in the property to be able to fix it up, to get it up to standards, to make it look like the rest of the properties in the neighborhood. However, it's worth it. And what I mean by worth it, let's look at it. $200,000 is what I'm gonna have to finance to be able to purchase the property and to be able to renovate it. But again, it's going to be able to sell for $300,000 because, hey, it has that equity value in there. So we use equity again to see the net of how much we would have. But usable equity, we'll talk about that later and how that works. And so that existing equity is really, really important, especially when we talk about flipping a property or talking about usable equity. So let's get on to the next one. The next one is creating equity. Now you're probably like, well, how can you create equity? This is one of the situations I had with a few clients where they weren't looking for the best deal. It's because of the situation that they were in. They had a family, don't want to stay in an apartment. They don't want to get a bigger apartment because they got another little one on the way, or they don't want to rent a house anymore, whatever the case may be, but they want to hurry up and move. And they're looking like, hey, Caleb, I don't want the best deal. I know that that's what you will typically get for us, but we just want a nice house. We're willing to pay the price. As long as it appraises properly, we're willing to go. Okay, this is where we at. I would also bring up to them, if their financial situation is okay, I'd be like, hey, instead of doing a 30-year loan, why not consider doing a 15 or 20-year loan, especially 15, because the interest rates are typically lower. And on top of that, as you're paying down a 15-year mortgage, you're putting a bigger dent by the time you're in year 5 or year 7. So now remember, equity is how much the property appraises for minus how much you owe on the property. So as I'm paying that property down year by year by year, how much I owe is getting significantly further away from how much the house appraises for. And if all things say well, especially if it was a new house that you purchased in a trending neighborhood, it might actually be expanded exponentially. But again, we're not trying to sell dreams, but just trying to say in reality. And so here we are. You're creating equity by paying that property down. This is not the most ideal way of doing things. I have seen it play out pretty well for some people, but majority of the time, again, you have to keep throwing money at it until you're able to pay it down over a few amount of years. I would say that would be last resort in my suggestion. And again, that's just my perspective. But let's move forward. So what is the next component to 3 points of a deal? Well, the next component would be cash flow. Cash flow is when I'm looking at how much the potential rents in the area will be versus how much my mortgage will be. And when I say mortgage this time, let's talk about it in this regards. Let's include, I know it's principals and interest, but let's just include insurance and taxes and HOA fees if you have that. We just include it all. We're just saying right now, mortgage is just including all that. I know It can be just principals and interest. I understand all that. That's cool. But for right now, for simplification, let's just include it all there. So let's just say the rents in the area is $2,500 and my mortgage is $1,800. Well, that means that I have $700 positive cash flow if I were to rent out this property. And so when I'm looking at it, if I want to rent out the property or if I need to, I can and make a positive cash flow of $700, which is wonderful. However, I will point out this. All positive cash flows are not worth it, but it's up to the person. I believe everybody should have a threshold. I feel myself renting a property for $100 a month profit or $200 of profit is not really worth it, because as soon as a faucet break, as soon as a toilet break, as soon as any little minor thing happen, your cash flow is either taken away or you got little of it left. You're only making $10, $15. And who wants to spend hundreds of thousands or even tens of thousands for me only to make 50, 20, or be in a negative cash flow per month? It's not worth it. And for me, I do not believe in negative cash flows. I try to tell people to stay away from negative cash flows unless you're flipping a property, in which is not even something to even consider. Again, everybody has their own perspective, and I believe that everybody should have a threshold of how much they're willing to make minimum, if I can say it that way, the minimum that you're willing to make per month from renting your property. So that's cash flow. The last one is called sellability, or how readily I can sell the property. A lot of times, and I've ran into this with clients, they'll be looking at properties, these big, beautiful homes or brand new homes. I mean, they're savvy, got, all the new smart home items, and it's just beautiful. It's just wonderful. Or recently renovated, or even recently built. Somebody, bought land in an undesirable neighborhood and built it up. Well, the thing about it is, though, as wonderful as the house may be, most people are not going to purchase the house because of what's around it. And so when we talk about undesirable, it can be, the way cars look outside in regards of broken down cars or sofas outside or whatever the case may be. It can just be in an undesirable neighborhood. And it doesn't have to just look like that. It can also be next to a chemical plant, next to an airport, next to a train station. If we ever talk about it, what does it mean to go across the tracks? That was a thing back in the day. And that's also what made real estate prices begin to drop. And so we have to observe all those things to be like, hey, is this a property that other people would want to purchase? Because if they don't, that means most likely the sellability for that property is not going to be worth your time. If this is a dream place where you want to live, that's your thing, well, wonderful. However, most of the time it's not a good look, because most people don't always stay in their first home. They move out and buy another one. And so if I'm stuck in my first home and I spent the money and I can't even really sell it quickly, it's not going to be a good feeling. So again, sellability is very, very important. You want to be in a neighborhood that's in demand, that you'll be able to sell your property quickly for and be able to get top dollar for. Because if not, if that neighborhood takes a while to be able to sell, it means more negotiations are going to happen. Prices are typically going to drop. And as those properties drop in value and are being purchased at that lower price, the appraisers are going to use those prices, those comps, to be able to set prices for the neighborhood. So it's not a good look whenever you don't have the sellability. Typically, we want sellability, but that's not always the case. So what you mean by now is the case. When we look at those 3 points that we've used, we have equity, we have cash flow, and we have sellability. You can use them for different things. And what I mean by that is, if I'm flipping a property, buying a distressed property and then trying to renovate it and put it back on the market for a profit, the first things that I'm looking for is equity and sellability. Because if they have these two, that's what I need to be able to flip a property. I'm not really interested in cash flow because I'm interested in selling this property in 6 to 8 months after I finish my renovations and all that jazz. However, if I'm renting a property, yes, sellability is nice, but that's not my real concern. I want to make sure the cash flow is there. And again, make sure that it's at my threshold. And I always say this, just in case, it's good to have equity in a property. It's always good to have equity, because the reason being, if it's a property that you're holding later on, I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes you can have some really incredible cash flows where, again, it doesn't have to be that much equity. But, like I'm thinking, sometimes just rent a trailer. Trailers depreciate unless you have the land. And we'll talk about that. If you have a trailer, you definitely want the land because you can use it for collateral. But some of those are cash cows and you can make some serious amount of money with them. But Typically, if it's a property that you're holding, you want to kind of make sure you have some type of equity, because the reason being, you do not want to keep using your cash all the time. The more usable equity that you have, the more that you can use for collateral when buying another property. Instead of putting 20% down, you could just take one of your properties, move it over, and sign the paperwork. You just bought a house without using any money. But we'll talk about that later. And so again, when we're talking about renting a property, we definitely want to look at cash flows. So if we can see these 3 points, if you have all three, if you have the equity there, if you have the cash flow, and you have the sellability, it is a great deal. The question is going to be, is it a great deal that I can take advantage of at that moment? I might not be able to, because I might not be in the financial space, and that's okay for now, but at least I'm able to recognize what is a good deal, because one day I'll be in that financial space, and if I keep listening to New Harlem Realty and subscribe right now and hit that bell button, and hey, you never know, that financial space might come quickly. So that's 3 points of a deal. I hope this helps. I hope it simplifies it for you. Looking forward to the next video next time I see you. God bless.